numb and my heart's feeling heavy. Got anxiety in my blood, but I'm about to get ready to talk about it and ashamed of the way that my mind works straight, flexing like a knee-jerk. Got a lot of things on my mind, got a lot of things to pursue. Ain't no stigma gonna stop me from reaching my potential. What a nice view.
Welcome to Talk Mental Health with Logan Noon. This is episode 35. I have on Officer Ben Hittle. Right now, Officer Ben Hittle serves as the head security officer at my medical school, but he really has an interesting career. He spent many years as a police officer, even worked on the SWAT team as a hostage negotiator, and today we're really going to get into kind of the mental health of police officers and the high rates of depression, alcoholism, and suicide. So it's really a fun conversation, kind of a different topic for me, so I think you guys are really going to like this one. All right, Ben. Well, I start off every episode with a cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for doing this. Happy New Year, sir. This is the last day of 2018. We're recording this.
To you as well. Thank you. I brought down one of my very special Kentucky cold snack beverages for you.
Oh yeah, these are fantastic. From Montana?
Yes.
Very, very cool. Yeah, we're in your little pub right now. This is a sweet little setup you got here.
The Hittle German-Irish pub here.
Yeah.
It's an Irish pub, but with Hittle, how can you call it Irish?
Yeah, I was like, are you Irish?
I'm not, no.
Okay.
Well, everybody's Irish, especially on St. Patrick's Day. But
yeah.
No, I'm 75-25, 75% German and 25 Irish.
Oh, okay. I'm 50% Irish, 25% Danish, 25% Norwegian. And when my great-grandfather actually came on the boat over to Ellis Island, he used to be, it was, I don't know his first name, but it was McNoonan. But he had such an Irish brogue that they couldn't understand him. They're like, Noon, screw it.
That's good.
Yeah. So that's kind of the story. So I guess the podcasters, the listeners sort of understand how we know each other and how we kind of became friends over the last 2 years. So you are the security officer at my medical school.
Correct.
And how long have you been doing that?
Well, I just completed my 10th year this past summer. The security director position was in the offering back in 2008. As a matter of fact, I had been at Yakima Police, where I had worked my career. Mm-hmm. 33 years, Yakima Police, retired. Took a long, lengthy 6 months off.
Okay.
But all my friends were still working. I found out that I was kind of like the kid that stayed home from school playing hooky. There's nobody to play with.
Yeah.
I was 55 when I retired. I'm at the golf course. My buddies are at their office. I'm at the gym. They're working. So the university is just getting ready to open the doors shortly. And the management team there at the time that founded the university knew me from my previous career in law enforcement.
Oh, okay.
They'd heard me speak about some crime prevention. Actually, I used to talk to downtown groups and do crime prevention talks as a downtown foot patrol officer and transit center officer. And so the management, the president and the controller had heard me speak about crime prevention through environmental design. And I actually had gone into that very extensively, getting expert rating in CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design. They heard me speak about that, and they said, well, we need that type of thing implemented in our new med school that we're going to build. Mm-hmm. So that was before they even had the building up. And so they reached out to the chief of police at Yakima at the time, who ordered me to go out and meet with the architects and planners for the med school. So I actually had input on the building, on the parking lots and lighting and those types of things way back when I was a city cop.
Oh, okay.
And I had no intentions whatsoever of being campus security. That just wasn't in my line of sight,
Yeah.
But after about 6 months of retirement, finding out that, hey, I don't think I'm quite ready to be hanging out on the porch or the golf course at age 55, then I went back, re-interviewed, and they let me have the opportunity to be the security director, which was really cool because I could set things up the way I wanted them.
Yeah.
So I set the med school up kind of like a cop would set it up if his daughter was attending there.
Okay.
Electronic door locks, camera systems, protocols, access control, ID badges worn, that type of thing. And it worked out pretty nice. It was a lot of work for that first year because
I imagine, yeah.
you're starting from scratch. It's not like you're taking over a job that somebody else has already done the policies and procedures and all that. But once I got that out of the way, I was only planning on, I told them I'd work there for a year.
Oh, okay.
And
here we are.
Here we are now, 10 years later.
10 years? Okay.
10 plus.
Okay, cool.
So it worked out. It's been a good fit for me.
Yeah.
I enjoy the fact that I'm working with young, smart students that want to be there. They all have a purpose. Everybody has a story. They all have their own story. But I've kind of been, besides being the cop there, I've found that I'm kind of that go-to if they're not quite sure who to talk to or what to do. I'm not a counselor, but I have an open door policy, and a lot of times students, if they feel like they're in crisis, they're comfortable talking to me instead of somebody that gives them a grade.
Yeah, and I was about to say, I think of you as so much more than a security officer. It's like you're almost a morale officer as well.
Yeah.
You really make an effort to, like you said, you always have your door open, but you kind of walk around the hallways. You make an effort to talk to all the students, get to know the students. You're begging them to play handball with you and stuff. I remember, when I first moved to Yakima, I didn't have a car. I finally found a place to live, but I was, bouncing ideas off of you where I should go buy a car, what auto shop I could go to, and so it was really nice that I didn't have that kind of relationship with any other staff members, and so it was very comforting. Like you said, you looked at PNWU as like your extension of your family kind of thing. And I don't know the names of any of the security officers that you've hired. They seem like all nice people, but you're so much more than a security officer at our school. And so thank you for kind of being that kind of person.
Yeah, it just kind of morphed into that. Originally, when they hired me, they wanted to make sure that we met all the standards for campus security as far as the federal guidelines and that type of thing. But the administration, when they hired me, knew that I would probably also be not a counselor, but kind of that step before counseling, where they knew my background. They knew that I had come from law enforcement, that I had done a lot of other assignments in law enforcement that were similar to crisis situations, and so that's kind of how that worked in. I figure if my kid was 5 states away and had car trouble or didn't know where to go for a doctor or a dentist or what have you, I'd want somebody like me to be able to help him out. So that's, I'm not a realtor, I'm not a car salesman, but I can at least throw out 3 or 4 names or companies and go from there. So
no,
I've had good luck
absolutely,
with that.
man. Yeah, and so you kind of, I like to say you're eventually going to be mayor of Yakima, and I will contribute to your campaign once I finally have a real job and I'm not living off student loans. You heard it here first.
I'll get a hold of you if I ever decide to do that.
Okay, cool. You can solicit me. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. But so you have grown up in Yakima like your entire life, right?
I'm a lifer. That's right.
Okay.
I grew up here. I'm what's known as a gapper.
Okay.
I grew up as a little kid in Union Gap.
Okay. A little bit south of here.
Just south of the city limits. And I went to Union Gap. I took the yellow bus from Union Gap to Eisenhower High School. Now all the school districts have kind of an open choice where they can go to which high school they care to go to. In my time, it was you went to the district that you were sent to, and so I took a bus to Eisenhower High School. And then as soon as I got my driver's license, I could drive back and forth.
Yeah.
So there was a little logistics issue there with living in Union Gap. If you played sports after school, your parents, how are you going to get home? The buses go home at 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
So, but it all worked out well.
But like the ins and outs of Yakima. I mean, I'm sure when you go to when you go to like a grocery store, I mean, I bet 75% of the people there.
That's a quick sidebar story there is if my wife's really in a hurry, if we have to go by and get something quick and in and out and then get ready for friends coming over for dinner, sometimes I'm not allowed to go in the store with her. I'm put on strict stay at the car.
Yeah.
But Yakima's less than 100,000 people. I'm born and raised here. I played baseball here, school sports. I played handball since high school.
Yeah.
I went to a community college right out of high school. I was considering law enforcement as a career.
Okay.
So I worked a couple part-time jobs while I was going to school here in town, and before I became a police officer. So one of my part-time jobs was a men's clothing store.
Okay.
And so I worked at a very high-end clothing store.
I cannot picture that at all. No offense to your sense of style.
Nope.
It's Officer Hittle.
No offense taken. It was a very high-end, private-owned men's clothing store, and I worked at the theaters at night, Mercy Theaters at night, and I worked at a men's clothing store that's no longer in existence right now called Lee Seaman. And so those were my two jobs that I worked on a part-time basis going to YDC.
Okay.
And then after I turned 21, I began testing for law enforcement.
So what was that desire, though, that made you want to, protect your community, go into that, high-stress environment, high-risky environment of law enforcement?
Well, it's a couple different things. One is my older brother. I had a brother that was 12 years older than me. He's since passed, but he was a Army intelligence, came back, went to school, became a deputy sheriff, and moved up through the ranks, and he was a lieutenant at the sheriff's department. So 12 years older than me, as a junior high school kid, I could go on ride-alongs with my big brother.
Oh, okay.
When you go on a ride-along and you're in a police car and something goes down, you get to be right there during the Code 3 lights and siren and the takedown of the bad guy. It's the adrenaline that you can't ever forget. Once you get that adrenaline in you, it's a memory that's a lifetime.
Yeah, and I mean, I of course, I think all of us can kind of relate to being that quote-unquote adrenaline junkie in some sense. I love fast cars, I love skiing. However, I think that type of adrenaline is nowhere near what it must be like to be a police officer.
The camaraderie of the law enforcement group as well, too, is really... I used to tell when I would do a school talk for career day, being in law enforcement is probably the closest thing to playing pro sports that the average guy could do. Pro sports that's the ultimate career. If I could have been a relief pitcher, I would have taken that in a heartbeat, okay? Yeah. But you go into law enforcement, you go to work, you park your civilian car out in the lot, you go down to the locker room and suit up with your co-workers. Then you go up to the muster room where you're having your police muster team meeting. So you've suited up, you put your gear on, you've gone to the team meeting, and now you all take the field. And then you're out there backing each other up just like you do in sports.
Yeah, and especially team sports.
Teamwork, team sports. So, and in law enforcement, if something's going down that's pretty hot, we had a call out that we used to do. If it's an in progress hot call like a felony, we would do what's called a swarm, and every officer that was on duty would go to that location. If he's there, if an officer is out west, out here where I live, taking a cold lawnmower theft case or a cold garage burglary. Yeah. Excuse me, I'll be right back as soon as I finish this call. And even the west side officer would come down to the east side beat where I worked and involve himself in the swarm. That got everybody involved and motivated in taking that call. And it really built the squad's camaraderie and competitive attitude. A lot of times if you're the west side cop, you're out here kind of by yourself. You hear the radio going and everybody's going on hot calls on the east side, and you're out here taking the next stolen lawnmower. Well, by doing the swarm, and that's a sergeant of mine, Sergeant Peck and myself kind of put together this swarm plan and got it okayed by the upper lieutenants that guys would leave their calls if it wasn't a serious call, and everybody would converge on that area. So you have a auto theft suspect that's bailed out of his car and he's running, and you contain the area, you get a perimeter set up, and now every officer on your squad is now in that vicinity. Yeah. Almost impossible for them to escape. Yeah. And that way everybody's got some involvement. Now, the primary officer that got the call, he's the one that's going to do the report. everybody else goes back and finishes their theft report
yeah.
or whatever they're working on. But it was really a cool way to get some of these old guys that were knocking on retirement's door that were just kind of putting in their time, and you know, they were wearing the uniform and doing their job, and you know, anybody that puts the uniform on is risking his life, so you got to give them credit. But this got them back into police work again.
Yeah,
it was kind of cool,
and it makes sense, like how that builds kind of that camaraderie, helping each other out, and it seems almost very familiar. You know, and I'm speaking here as a civilian. I'm of course speculating, I guess, through TV shows and movies that I've seen, but very similar to the camaraderie that's built through like a military environment kind of thing, and how everyone has each other's back. And I guess kind of, you know, being that this is Talk Mental Health with Logan Noon, one question that I sort of have, it's, you know, both police officers and of course, you know, military personnel, they have that strong sense of camaraderie, but of course there is a mental health sort of component of this. They're exposed to, of course, high stress environments, but even though there is that strong camaraderie component, they don't feel maybe comfortable all the time discussing, you know, elements of anxiety, that hypervigilant state of mind, and it seems like a disconnect to me. It doesn't make sense that why they wouldn't feel comfortable discussing that with one another.
Good point. When I first started, it was kind of a different time in law enforcement. Almost all of my coworkers were just back from Vietnam. They were Vietnam vets, or military vets
and
anyway.
You have not served in the military.
And I didn't serve in the military. My father and my older brother that I just referenced were both military veterans.
Okay.
And there was a lottery going on at that time, and I got a great lottery number.
Dodged a bullet.
Dodged a bullet, so to speak, in that case, and stayed in school and became a cop.
Yeah.
Actually, by encouragement of my dad and older brother to do so.
Oh, really?
It was just the opposite. They pounded the table and said, "There's no need for you to volunteer into the military at this time, at this war." They were both, even though they were veterans. My father fought in World War II, and my older brother was pre-Vietnam, but not really pre-Vietnam. Pre-Vietnam being known to the public.
Yeah. So
I always felt kind of bad that my dad was a veteran, my brother was a veteran, and I hadn't gone in. But on the other side, they definitely encouraged me, stay in school, become a cop. If you get drafted, go, of course. And that was the way I took it.
Yeah.
But what it's going to tell you is as a young officer, it was kind of, you were afraid to show any emotion or sign of weakness. If you went to a tough call, it was kind of one of those, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen, kid.
Yeah.
Okay? And for me, especially as a young married man, having children, when I went to like a SIDS death call, it really bothered me.
Yeah.
And I had a tough time dealing with SIDS deaths. And
I guess for the listeners who don't know, that's sudden infant death syndrome.
That's correct.
I dated a girl who she lost a younger sibling to that. It wreaked havoc on the whole family. It was horrible.
Yeah.
So I imagine that being very traumatizing, also for the police officer first on scene.
Tough on the police officer, tough, horrific on the family, and calls, I think, more young officers, especially if they're young married officers with children. It's obvious any officer has a tough time with a child that's been injured, hurt, molested, all those things. And then when you have a child that's the same age as the child that you're dealing with, it just doubles it. Same thing with ER docs.
Yeah.
They see the same thing. This one old cop said, "Kid, you can't unsee what you've seen."
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that are etched. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things that are etched in our minds that are there. And they're never going to leave. But you just learn to deal with it and move on is what you have to do. Now, fast forward, before I retired from the police department, I was actually sent to training, and I was a member of the critical incident debriefing team. So now they've seen the benefit of trying to get cops some in-house help. The critical incident debriefing team included a trained psychologist that was on our. Actually, I had two psychologists that were on our hostage negotiations team, and one of those psychologists was on our critical incident debriefing team. And so they saw the benefit if an officer or firefighter has been to this horrific scene to make sure that those first responders had somebody to talk to and could bounce things off of. The interesting thing is it's always just within the team that was there at the scene. In law enforcement or firefighting, you'll get a lot of Monday morning quarterbacks.
Yeah.
No different than sports. Hey, why'd you make that call? Why'd you throw that fat curveball and you hit it out of the park? That type of thing. Well, same thing. Why didn't you shoot him? Why didn't you do this? Well, if you weren't on the squad, if you weren't one of the officers that was at that particular incident, then basically it's shut up.
Yeah.
You're not part of this scene. You don't have any say. And so usually it's just the guys that were there that will meet and talk about it. And that's an open conversation. I felt good about doing this. I wish I would have done that. That really scared me. That really pissed me off. All those feelings. And everyone's allowed to speak freely. It's in a inner circle, confidential only. And you also have a psychologist there that can kind of help guys get through their feelings and see and understand what they're feeling too.
Yeah. And this takes place basically immediately after a kind of crisis event?
They try and do it within 24 hours.
Okay. Okay. And then is there follow-up though, a month after that crisis event? Or is it just basically in this line of work, there's those type of crises so often that it's very difficult to have that kind of follow-up?
The ones that I were exposed to, it was follow-up if you wanted it or needed it. So they didn't come back and check on you necessarily.
And is it safe to assume that a lot of men and women don't always come back and
That's right.
check on? Yeah.
That is correct. In law enforcement, it is kind of seen as a sign of weakness to have to go talk to the department counselor or psychologist. In any occupation, I think that it's hard not to feel that way. It takes life experience and maturity to come back around to knowing that, hey, if I do this, then I'm going to be a better cop, I'm going to be a better husband, I'm going to be a better dad.
Yeah.
But you don't know that when you're 23. There's so much that you don't know that unfortunately, until life happens, you just don't know it.
And it seems like you had a career in law enforcement where you were involved in some of the most stressful sort of environments. Like I don't of course know the full intricacies, but you eventually were a hostage negotiator. And those type of environments must just be absolutely insane. So how did you learn, those sort of skills to properly manage kind of de-stressing from those environments?
In my case, back in the old days, hostage negotiators and SWAT teams were separate units. And so when my first involvement in a specialty team I was a tactical officer on the SWAT team at Yakima. And they had a hostage negotiations team, but they weren't letting younger officers go on to that team yet. So I was allowed to be on the tactical SWAT team, and I did that for about 5 years. And so there's, of course, SWAT training. They already had that set up. You go to Fort Lewis. They have all sorts of, rappel towers, automatic weapons, special weapons and tactics, that type of thing. Well, after I had done that for about 5 years, the hostage negotiations team was getting ready to form, and I put in for that. And I was allowed to be a member of the hostage negotiations team. At the time, I was like the first of the tactical guys that had gone to hostage negotiations. It really paid off because now somebody on the hostage negotiations team could speak to the SWAT team and understand what their strategies and what was going on, and they knew that I knew. So now we're on the same page, we're speaking the same language. Fast forward a few years, they all became, the negotiators and SWAT tactical are all in the same team organization. You don't send out a SWAT van without sending out the hostage negotiations van. One example would be probably a legal issue if you sent a SWAT team and they had to shoot somebody and you hadn't shown that you had negotiated in good faith.
Mm.
You need to at least try to get the person to surrender and come out and not harm anybody else inside the building.
Yeah.
Show good faith, you know.
And one thing I've heard from my friends who are veterans is they seem to thrive in environments of high stress. And, they maybe think clearer, or they just kind of are very in tune with the moment. But it's those moments after the stressful environment that's extremely challenging. And I think that's what they're really alluding to, is elements of PTSD. And so, I don't know if you or any of your colleagues sort of had elements of that, but how did you advise those individuals to sort of move on and deal with maybe flashbacks they had, or like obsessions about, oh, if I did this differently in this situation, it could have turned out better, or whatever may have you?
Usually what I found for myself and then for other team members is talk about it. The more I would tell my story of what was bothering me to a team member that was there, and he relate back to me, the better I felt. Mm-hmm. It was kind of like just continuing to ease a little bit off of that teapot that was overboiling. The more you talk about it, the less pressures build up. Mm-hmm. And the more I could tell my story without getting too emotional, the more I knew I was doing better. Mm-hmm. Usually it was just only to people that were at the same scene, at the call. But eventually, one example, the psychologist that I worked with had me come do a speaking engagement at a critical incident debriefing training that he was putting on. My speaking engagement was about a shooting situation that I had been in. I was working for the university when I put that talk together, mm-hmm. and I'm sitting at my desk and I found the file notes, and I'm typing up what I'm going to say to this group, and the next thing you know, I'm slamming doors and I am pissed.
Yeah.
And I thought, what's wrong with me? Well, I was engaging back to that incident that had happened probably 10 years ago. When I spoke at this training exercise, that was the first time I'd ever spoke to anybody outside our group. Remember, mm-hmm. usually we only speak freely in front of our own group. And this was a law enforcement audience. They were fellow officers, but they weren't part of that group. Mm-hmm. And the rule is, if you're not there, shut your pie hole.
Yeah.
Well,
so what I'm kind of hearing then from you is like, I'm going to be a psychiatrist. I want to go into, I think working with police officers and veterans is something that interests me. However, like I said, I have no background in this. So I get the notion that, police officers and probably veterans too feel very comfortable talking about people of their same community, their colleagues. But how can we start to bridge that communication between a civilian like me and a police officer? And what should I be thinking about as a civilian that I can be a better listener, a better communicator, and also, it sounds like not impose any sort of judgment, like, why didn't you do this differently?
I think that with the psychologist that we had, it worked out very well. Even though he was not law enforcement, he was in a local comprehensive mental health team. Mm-hmm. And we knew him a little bit as that crisis mental health counselor would come do an evaluation on somebody. But we would have to take maybe somebody into protective custody and have an evaluation done, and so we would meet these guys when they would come either to the station or to the ER to do their evaluation. Eventually, I got to know a couple of them that I thought had the personality type that could work with cops better than others, and I recruited those two guys to be on our hostage negotiations team. We actually sent them to hostage negotiations training. They went to the beginning and advanced hostage negotiation training in Seattle at the police academy. Now, they never did actual negotiating, but they had headphones on and they heard every word said between the negotiator, whoever was doing the negotiating, and the suspect, mm-hmm. or the barricaded subject.
Yeah.
And so and then we took one of those people and put him into our debriefing team. But we had something in common. Now, I've also seen officers that are very, very friendly to introduce a fellow church member. They have something in common. Hey, this is my handball buddy, and he happens to be Dr. So-and-so.
Yeah.
Something in common. We have handball connections. If you can find some common ground with those police officers and build on that, usually they will take you in. They're not gonna be your best friend the first time they meet you.
Certainly, yeah.
Okay? By nature, we're taught that if I trust everybody, I'm probably not going to survive my career.
Yeah.
I'm going to get hurt. So there's a built-in distrust, paranoia, if you want to call it that, but it's healthy paranoia.
Yeah.
Because you have to be suspect. You know, I used to joke, you know, we get paid good money to not trust innocent people, you know.
Yeah.
But really, you know, if your hands are in your pockets and I'm on a call, I don't know if you have a derringer or a knife in your hand. It's the unknown. But it's the unknown that makes me want to go to work tomorrow night, and I'm a good cop. Yeah. Because I want to know what that unknown is.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because there was actually someone who, one of my listeners, and actually it was someone at our school, I'll tell you after, you know, the recording's over. But she has a family member of hers who is a police officer. And she actually, suggested he listen to the podcast because we talk a lot about anxiety. And he deals with severe anxiety. And I think a lot of police officers deal with that anxiety because they are better police officers in the line of duty when they're always in that hypervigilant state of mind. Their sympathetic system is going crazy. They're aware of everything around them. They're analyzing, you of course understand the intricacies of this much better than I do, but maybe I understand the physiology.
Right.
But after, once you punch out and that's over, turning that switch off and getting in that relaxed state of mind, I imagine, is very challenging for a lot of police officers. So have you had any colleagues, or have you had any experience with anxiety, and what suggestions would you have for someone dealing with these kind of issues?
Well, definitely it's hard to unwind. That adrenaline that you're describing, that's what we live for. We start off as innocent young men that want to do something exciting and help people. And I think without realizing it, we all eventually become addicted to adrenaline.
Yeah.
I can remember getting specialty assignments, maybe being moved into detectives for 3 to 5 years. Mm-hmm. The first 6 months, I felt like I was depressed. I thought, what's wrong with me? I should be excited. I'm a detective. It's what every cop wants to do someday, is be a detective. And instead, I would be in this downer mood. Well, it's because I'm not on the street. I'm not looking for that next hot call.
Yeah.
I'm paper in, paper out. I might do this really great arrest warrant, but the guys in uniform take the warrant and go have the fun.
They do the exciting
They go
stuff.
do the exciting stuff. I'm just banging on a computer getting the next warrant ready, or the next case. And so, yeah. And then eventually you kind of come back around. What helped me is when I was in detectives, that gave me the opportunity to work out on my lunch hour, play handball, get involved in handball tournaments, softball tournaments. So that was my fix, so to speak.
Is the exercise?
Yes.
Okay.
Exercise definitely helped. Mm-hmm. Exercise, and if you could, proper sleep. Those are the two things that really help cops. Exercise and proper sleep. And that's easier said than done.
Yeah, especially when you're doing like a night shift or some weird ass hours. Yeah.
Night shift, you're working all night, you get off, it's daylight, everybody's moving around, people at your house are moving around, the neighbors are all out mowing the lawn, the kids in the next door swimming pool are having a great time, it's hard to sleep, and then 9 out of 10 times you've got court. Don't think defense attorneys don't pay attention to what shift you're on. Okay? If Ben's on day shift, chances are he's going to be showing up for court when he's subpoenaed. Mm-hmm. If he's on graveyard, I've got maybe a 20% chance that he might oversleep.
Interesting.
Let's schedule that case for when Ben's on graveyard.
Yeah, 9 a.m. Yeah.
You got it.
Yeah.
So a lot of times you'll get a few hours sleep, you're up, grab a quick shower, you're in court. You change your clothes, come back, try and catch some sleep, go to work. So it's disrupted sleep.
Yeah.
Very hard to get that good REM sleep that you would like to see people get.
And that lack of sleep I imagine it makes the anxiety much worse, but it also has manifestations on heart disease and other bodily functions. There was a study that I read somewhere that nurses who work night shifts die about 10 years earlier than nurses who work day shifts. And I actually have a stat here that, where was it? I forget exactly where, but it was like police officers compared to regular population die like 8 years earlier than everybody else. And I really wonder if that's a factor.
I think I heard something like 20 years earlier. Police officers die before firefighters. The problem that we run into, you see, is when I'm not working as a cop, I'm not really off duty. See, off duty in my world, even today, is a code yellow. I'm always anticipating what might happen, what's around the corner. So I never really totally go into that white zone.
Okay.
See, and that's how come firefighters can live longer than police officers. Firefighters have the opportunity, they sleep well. They sleep at the fire station. So they can sleep. And even though the firefighters have the most dangerous job in the world, when the bell rings and they go on a fire, they're up here in code red the whole time.
Yeah.
They get the fire put out, they save lives, they haul people off, then they go back to the station house and they can go into the white zone. They put their equipment away, they can get some good sleep, and they don't go out until they get the next call. Where cops, you might go to that shots fired call and then you might just go take a cold auto theft case. And then you're back at a shots fired call. But in between just driving through alleys and downtown, you're always looking to see what's around the corner, what's that person doing, where's his hands, what's the look on his face look like. So you're always in this mindset of code yellow. Okay. That what if that's in your mind is what keeps you from relaxing into that nice white zone that it'd be nice to go to for the sake of recovery, sleep.
Yeah.
And therefore, nothing, I'm not saying anything ill about firefighters.
Yeah.
But they definitely have the most dangerous job in the world, but yet they have the opportunity that when they're not at that most dangerous job, they can come right back down to normal life.
Yeah, and I actually even have some stats that we could even sort of prove that point. There's a stat that I found that the suicide rate in police versus firefighters was police officers are 4 times as likely to kill themselves compared to firefighters. And I imagine that's what you're describing. The job in itself is maybe a more constant level of stress versus firefighters. But, also in this culture of environment, when people see firefighters coming, we know, oh, they're putting out a fire, yay, 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 we cheer them on kind of thing. When, police officers come, it's different. It's obviously there's difference in different sets of communities. People react differently, but it's certainly, there's not always a parade for police officers the same way there's a parade for firefighters kind of thing. And so what do you think are some of the differences between this suicide rate between police and firefighters, most specifically culturally, and like how people react sort of to both sets of individuals?
Well, and I suppose one thing is the personality type of a lot of police officers is very competitive, very, very competitive. If it's the same as if you were pitching in sports or playing in an athletic game, you play to win, and you're very disappointed in yourself if you don't save that touchdown, if you don't make that tackle, or if you don't strike that batter out. And when a bad guy gets away from you, if you just shrug your shoulders and say, "Oh well," that's an officer I'd rather not work next to the district with.
Yeah.
Okay? You need to take it personal when somebody gets away. And also, if there's crimes occurring on your district, that's a personal affront. That shouldn't happen. Well, it's going to happen. But yet, you see, with this competitive attitude, you're not accepting these losing statistics that you're getting. So you're kind of, a young A young doctor can probably, in his mindset, for at least the first 5 to 10 years after med school, the world is yours. There's no limit to how far you can go and succeed. A young cop, within a couple years out of the police academy, realizes that he's playing for a losing team. We're not going to win this battle.
Yeah.
Well, that's only 2 years out of the police academy. You got 10 years out of med school before you found out that it might not happen. Or maybe it does happen.
Yeah.
But you see the ceiling that got put on that young cop right away. Here, not to be too naive, but most of us think, hey, we're going to go to the police academy, we're going to come back, and we're going to clean up crime in the streets and save lives,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's kind of unrealistic, but that's kind of that young cop mindset.
Well, and it's sort of this, like, I've never heard of the concept of, like, a corrupt firefighter, or like a bad apple in the firefighter community. It's like, well, okay, was he not holding the hose the way he's supposed to or something? But in police officers, we hear of the idea of corrupt police officers all the time. There's also, of course, been examples of police officers that maybe used violence when it wasn't necessarily warranted. And so I'm sure that's a very slim portion of the police community, but those bad apples, it just spreads like wildfire, and then everyone sort of thinks all cops sort of are, not all, of course, but you get what I'm saying.
Absolutely. A classic example of that is one of my buddies I went to school with. His dad was a Superior Court judge, and my buddy that I went to school with was an attorney. And he made the statement that his dad once told him. He said, as a defense attorney, remember when you clean outhouses for a living, you're going to get shit on your hands. Defense attorneys and police officers are dealing with the environment of people that are going to promote
bad aspects of society.
Bad things. And if a police officer or an attorney is susceptible to that, they're exposed to it 100 times more than John Doe citizen at the hardware store or the young doctor working internal medicine. So we're exposed to it. We're cleaning that outhouse. Maybe we forgot to wear our gloves.
Yeah.
Financial situations in the family, divorce, all those factors probably play into it as well. A lot of departments where I worked, we had a very, very thorough pre-employment background check, psychological, and polygraph.
Oh, okay.
Pre-employment polygraph isn't always done on every department nationwide. Some departments, there's state laws that prohibit it, and some just can't afford it because it's an expensive examination. So that's another factor. But I think our exposure to the negative, when you're exposed to negative all the time, it doesn't take much for somebody that's down and out to possibly give into it, to the temptation, whether it be straying on their spouse, prostitution.
Yeah.
I'm proud to say I've never worked with a dirty cop. That's a bold statement, but I can tell you, I've never worked with a dirty cop. Had I have worked with a dirty cop, I would have been the reporting party.
Yeah.
Okay? I would have made sure that somebody investigated that person. So, but now you get into, Yakima's only 100,000 people too.
Yeah.
Pretty darn difficult for Ben Hittle to be the dirty cop in this town, because the whole world spots you at the grocery store or the sports bar or the church or wherever you are.
Yeah.
See?
Well, and also, the police officers, they deal with, the violence of a community. They deal with, of course, the people that are trying to game the system and cut corners and, drug dealers, whatever it may be. But then also an aspect of being a police officer is they are an extension of mental health treatment, in a sense that there was a stat I found online that 10% of all people in mental health crisis, the first person that they interact with is a police officer. And I've interviewed, of course, through this podcast and just, of course, living openly about my bipolar disorder, many people who were forced into treatment. And I've had sort of mixed reactions of what they say their interactions with police officers were like. Some were incredible, some obviously weren't the best. And, you know, maybe those police officers didn't do a great job, or maybe they did an amazing job and that person was just in a, you know, psychiatric state of mind and they couldn't really comprehend everything that was going on. So, you know, how do police officers get trained in how to deal with people that are in a psychiatric crisis?
Well, right now, you know, I've been out of the game for 10 years, but right now departments throughout the nation are doing all sorts of training in de-escalation. They're trying to always teach the officers how to reduce the hostile environment. Try, you know, everything from distance from the subject, staying back out of their comfort zone, voice management, not having to touch them unless it's absolutely necessary. See, and basically in my world, if I went hands-on, I figured the fight's on. Because when you're dealing with an emotional disrupted person, hands-on to me is like, here we go. Versus, unless they're getting ready to jump or something. And we didn't have that many jumpers in Yakima. There's only 2 tall buildings. Okay.
So, I guess then my question is, like, over, you know, your career in the police officer academy, or well, to being a police officer, like, how has it changed how police officers react and view and deal with people who are in psychiatric crisis? You know, like when you first started and versus, you know, when you retired.
Well, it's really changed for the better. We're not where we want to be yet, but it's really changed for the better. When I first started, whether a person was a mental or not, if they were trespassing, they got arrested for trespassing. You'd book them. And then they would get released. They don't have any money. They get released. They're back out on the street. They're back at the same place that you just explained you can't come here again, and they're trespassing, and you arrest them. Fast forward to now many of the departments, Yakima City and County, for example, have comprehensive mental health people assigned to their departments. So they actually have a little office space within the department. And so all the officers know them, and that mental health officer can actually be out in a patrol car doing ride-alongs with the officers. And if an officer has a subject that needs to be evaluated or needs some help with, they're already in the car heading that way. It's really a nice deal. And that just came about within about the last year in Yakima County area, city and county. And it's sweet because now the officers are getting a working relationship and a bond of trust with that person as well. Okay? And again, that goes a long ways in law enforcement, you know.
Getting them to maybe even open up themselves.
That is right.
Yeah.
So it's really nice to be able to have that on-call. You know, 30 years ago, I would detain that person and wait for an evaluation to happen either at the police station in a holding room or at the ER. Versus now, instead of taking me off the street for an hour and a half to 2 hours waiting for this process to happen, now we already have somebody that's possibly available to go directly to that call and start intervention or seeing what help they can get this person.
And then it's great that the police departments then are certainly adapting, because there certainly is a need. You know, I think we both would agree that there's more even of a need, because just mental health is such an issue with, you know, all the addiction that we see, and of course suicide and everything that does go on. But so I guess now kind of bringing this back to police officers and mental health challenges that they deal with, one aspect that we haven't really discussed at all is addiction kind of thing. And like, you know, it seems like a lot of police officers, when they deal with maybe elements of PTSD or insomnia or anxiety, they go towards alcohol because, you know, I don't know how often the drug testing is in the police environment, but at least alcohol is, you know, it's a legal substance, of course.
Right.
So what was like the alcoholism that you saw in your community, and how would you advise police officers to sort of deal with these kind of issues?
Alcohol was the drug of choice. There's no getting around it. Police officers aren't going to risk their career, in the most part, doing illegal drugs. Even though marijuana is legal now, they don't smoke marijuana. Alcohol is the drug of choice. It's socially accepted. The officers now have more ability, though, through their unions, through they have benefits that provide more counseling, more services than maybe in the old days. I think it's put out there on the table for them. It's a lot easier for them to access it without having to feel like I've got a black mark because somebody. Remember, we don't trust anybody except our partner, and we're keeping an eye on him. Okay, so if I go in and call for employee assistance, who gets to see that document? Where does that trail go? See, cops don't trust that.
Yeah,
I don't trust that to this day. I use employee assistance. I used it as a dad with my teenage daughters, and I've used it during times where I'm just like, why am I waking up angry? What's going on here? I need more handball. I need more exercise. I don't like my weight. Blah blah blah. Well, I've kind of gotten where so what? Who cares who sees that I went to see a employee assistance counselor? But that's not the way most cops think, and especially back in my good old days, where now I think it's more acceptable. I think guys it's not a sign of weakness anymore.
Well, and I think maybe also educating cops that are getting into the system, like, hey, by choosing this career, you are at a much higher rate of dealing with PTSD, of dealing with anxiety, or just substance abuse in general. Like, you're setting yourself up for this, so please don't be ashamed to use the services that we have.
Right. I mentioned earlier that there was a psychologist that I really admired, and I've attended a couple of his classes, Dr. Kevin Gilmartin. And he was a former police officer that went to school at night and got his PhD in psychology. And he actually wrote a book on emotional survival for law enforcement and their families. And so now, I bought that book for my nephew, who is a Yakima police officer, just for a couple years.
Oh, okay.
Now that it's more known that more police are killing themselves. Twice as many police officers kill themselves per year in the United States than get killed in the line of duty.
Yeah, that's
and yet,
terrifying.
At the police academy, we're spending all of our time on officer survival, fighting, takedowns, burglary in progress, felony stops, armed robbery approach, all these things that we're visualizing firefights over.
Yeah.
Which is valid training.
Yeah,
but
it's necessary.
But remember, less than half of us die from going to those calls than we do at home with our own weapon.
Yeah.
That's horrific. So now they're exposing young officers to some of these classes, and I believe at the Washington State Training Commission, Gil Martin's book is required reading for the young officers.
Oh, okay.
When I read that book the first time, I said, I wish somebody would have given me this about 2 divorces ago.
Yeah. Well, and to even put some stats on that, before we had this conversation, the National Alliance of Mental Illness reported that in 2017 there were 140 law enforcement suicides. I don't know how that compares to how many murder rates there were, or death in the line of duty for that year, but like you said, we can suspect it's about half. But from 2008 to 2011, the Anxiety and Depression Association of America reported that there were 224 officers who died in the line of duty over this course of 3 years, but there were 577 deaths by suicide in that same 3-year period. So even more than twice as many. So it's terrifying, and it's really, really sad.
It is. As an older adult male, I'm much more open to reach out to a friend that I think might be having trouble. I've lost officers that I worked with under suicide. And most of us always have that I didn't do enough, shoulda, coulda, woulda, every single one of us that's lost a friend has wondered, what could I have done or said?
Yeah. Yeah, suicide, it's crazy how much it impacts more than, when you're in that state of mind. I've even had suicide ideations myself that I just want to end my pain. But why I think I was so averted from doing something crazy stupid like that is my uncle ended up committing suicide because of his bipolar disorder. And I saw firsthand how much that affected my mother, my grandmother, and just for years and years later, she would have those same questions like, what could I have done? What could I have said differently? How could I have acted that would have helped this person? And it's just, suicide is just absolutely terrible, and it's so relevant in all aspects of our society, but especially, police officers. So what advice would you have for a police officer or any real first responder who's listening, who's dealing with any element of mental health challenge, whether that be, they're starting to drink too much, they can't sleep at night, they're having flashbacks maybe for a PTSD or any kind of anxiety? Like, where would you advise them to start treating their mental health issues?
At least start by talking to a trusted friend. Talk to a trusted friend about it. A lot of times, med school students, cops, we're all the same. We typically go and ask for advice from somebody that we think is going to tell us what we want to hear. And a lot of times, when we're in this situation that you're describing, we're not going to be getting the best advice if we talk to somebody who's going to tell us what we want to hear. We need to talk to somebody close enough that can say, hey, you're being a dumb shit. You need to get some help.
Yeah.
I've never seen you act this stupid or this crazy. I want you to get help.
And I think
it's a frank conversation that not everybody's comfortable to have.
Exactly. And I remember at least what my friends told me because I committed myself to this psych ward voluntarily, probably 9 years ago? I don't know, whatever, long time ago. But what they told me, they're like, if you had a huge gash across your face, you would go to the ER. If you were having trouble breathing or crazy chest pain, you would just go to the ER. So think of your brain as that same physiological condition that something's not working correctly, and you wouldn't have any shame, getting your heart checked out. Why should you have any shame getting your brain checked out? So what would you say to some police officer who is too embarrassed to go speak to that friend or too embarrassed to go speak to a counselor that's provided to them through their work?
I would just have to relate, they're talking to an old ex-cop, and I would just have to relate all of my past experiences in friends that have sought help and are still healthy, productive members of society. They didn't do themselves harm. They're still married. They're still professionals. It's worth the risk. I think a cop or firefighter considers it a risk to ask for help. They just do. But it's worth that risk because the benefits of it are so huge to get yourself back together and be that person, because they don't like themselves feeling that way.
Yeah. Your
self-esteem is shot. You're not feeling good about yourself. You got to get back into that. You got to get back into that starting five feeling. You're not the last guy to be picked to play basketball at a pickup game.
Yeah.
You got to get back in the game, and that's the best way. If I had a pulled muscle, I'd go to the physical therapist. So if I'm having emotional issues, I need to seek a specialist. Once I figured out I'm a gym rat, I'm a handball player, but I'm overweight. Well, if I was having a dental problem, I go to the dentist. So I finally went to a professional on weight training and weight loss. I thought, who am I kidding? I don't know how to handle this. I need to talk to a professional about it.
Yeah. Well, and one thing one of my goals for this podcast is sort of to normalize the fact that a lot of us have thought about suicide in some capacity over a course of our lifetime. There's some other stat that I found that 1 in 4 officers report that they have had suicidal thoughts.
Right.
And I think a lot of us at some low point of our life have had those kind of thoughts. And it is relatively, quote unquote, normal to have those thoughts. But it's not normal to continuously have those thoughts, to obsess about those thoughts. And, of course, it's not very normal to keep those thoughts to yourself. Like, you have to talk to somebody.
Right.
And you've lost someone close to you to suicide. I've lost people who I've known to suicide. And the worst is especially when it's never good. But the worst is when you have no idea and it just kind of smacks you out of nowhere. I remember I had a coworker who he was new on the job. I was actually training him. He had a family, and boom, one day he just stopped showing up to work, and we found out he ended up, taking his life.
Right.
And it was just horrific. He had teenage daughters. It was horrific.
What you're talking about there, the officers that did kill themselves that I knew were going through bad things. Bad things at work, bad things at divorce, relationships, some drug addiction. The officer that was drug addicted, he was drug addicted because he was having such back issues that he was taking narcotics so he could go to work. He wasn't taking drugs to stay home and be high. He wanted to go to work. And that ended up getting into the opiate addiction that we're talking about. But those, I still felt terrible, even though sometimes you see that train coming down the track and you're not stopping it. You're not going to get it stopped. You see the train wreck and everybody sees it, but nobody did anything. And that's the main thing I've promised myself is I'm going to do something rather than nothing.
Yeah.
I'm going to make that phone call or send that email or text. I'm going to reach out and reach out again. I had a civilian friend just in the last month that nobody saw it coming. Nobody. Successful, very successful business owner. Everything from planes to yachts to the lifestyle that we only dream about. But we didn't know how he was fighting with depression, and nobody saw it coming.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that, the blind sides like you're describing. The other ones hurt, but the other ones hurt bad, but you're going, I shoulda, coulda, woulda, because I did see that.
Yeah.
Versus the blind side that just, you got hit by a wild pitch and you weren't at the batting box. You were standing over by the dugout,
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
That's the one that whacks you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I think that's kind of a good way to sort of conclude kind of this podcast. I think if you're going through something, please reach out in any capacity to a friend or a professional, whatever it may be, but just don't. I think the worst way to deal with any sort of mental health condition is alone. But then also, maybe you are listening to this podcast and you don't really have any mental health conditions, but it's still your responsibility that if you know a family member, a friend, or a coworker, and you just suspect they're not totally their normal selves, they're just acting a little bit weird, it is your responsibility to try to say something. At least, hey, it might not work. You might not even do anything. Maybe they'll still continue to harm themselves or drink themselves to death, whatever it may be, but it is at least your responsibility to give it an attempt.
I agree.
Well, thanks again for coming on the show. This has been super fun. I'd like to have you back on. I will get you that handball game once my knee is better. All your friends over at Peak Performance know you.
Yes,
I name dropped you the first day, and they were like, "Oh, you know Ben? I'm sorry to hear that." And we'll get on the golf course soon too. My
physical therapist at Peak Performance, they kept me on the street as a cop. They kept me in the handball course back when I played tournaments. My body's been a constant state of physical therapy, orthopedic surgery, and rehab, but it keeps me back on the court. And handball probably was my go-to to release all the anxiety and whatever was going on. I felt better after I played a game of handball.
Well, and I think just the beauty of like sports, whatever it may be, if it's handball, for me it's kind of basketball and golf. It's just when you're in those states of mind playing sports, you're not thinking about your job. You're not thinking about maybe your trouble at home with the wife or the kids, or it doesn't matter. You're just so in tune with that moment and focused, where that's what we didn't talk about meditation today. No. But I would argue that playing sports is a state of meditation, that you're just so in tune with the moment and it's just so healthy for you.
We'll have another podcast someday about what I feel the benefits of handball and exercise are for med school students and other professionals.
We'll have to do that after once I get this knee rehabbed. I got a few more weeks of of rehab here. And then maybe we'll go play a game. After the game,
well,
talk
get
about
that.
handball.
I want you to know, get that knee rehab, but I've never beaten a well man yet.
Oh, okay. All right. Nice, man. All right, well, cheers.